and welcome to Nerdut's Newsstand, and as we continue our countdown to Halloween, we are going to talk about one of Batman's most feared rogues, and that is Scarecrow. The man that literally uses fear toxin as his weapon has to be one we talk about before Halloween, and I actually want to share my favorite story, but I don't want to scare you away because it does come from the New 52, but it is the quintessential Scarecrow story. A lot of what we see from Scarecrow is pure evil, and this actually gives him a little bit of humanity, and the story I am talking about is Cycle of Violence. Now, this is from Batman The Dark Knight 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15, and it is done by Gregg Hurwitz, and the art is by David Finch. Now, the art is absolutely phenomenal, but this is the second volume of Batman The Dark Knight, and the first volume was not in the New 52, and it was basically David Finch's love child, and it wasn't near as good. And once they brought Gregg onto the title, they made this story, and it is the perfect story. So let's talk about it. Now, I am going to obviously spoil a story that's years old. So just going to warn you there. If you are interested, make sure you check this out. If you are a fan of Scarecrow, absolutely, this is your story. I'm going to fly through it, right? So basically what we see is a little bit of a different take on Scarecrow, but also some that is still very similar. In the opening scene, you know that it is meaning business when we see Scarecrow humming to himself and sewing up his lips. For no other reason than to scare the little children that he is kidnapping and using basically as free guinea pigs for his experiments. Now, there is a romantic part of this. Has nothing to do with Scarecrow because that would be super weird. But it is between Bruce Wayne and Natalia. Now, this character, in my opinion, is a little bit of a throwaway character and put there to show us a side of Bruce Wayne that is really kind of withdrawn from everyday life. We see a lot of argument back and forth. And it's not just this character. We actually see him being withdrawn from Damian at the same time because he is so focused on finding these children and bringing them home normal. And what I mean by normal is these children are brought back. These children are not, necessarily physically abused. It's all mental. And it is the typical abuse become the abuser trope, but it is done so flawlessly. I absolutely love it. When they are returned, they have no ability to even really communicate. We do see one communicate, but besides that, they really don't talk. They're kind of mind wiped. They really don't have a good sense of what happened, where it happened, more than just hello and goodbye. They don't even have that sometimes. So he wants to bring them back normal. Now he is working with the GCPD and Gordon on this case. And because he is doing so, Gordon actually gets a little dose of fear toxin himself. And in doing so, he sees, basically his biggest fear is that he let James Jr. and Barbara down. And it was his fault for, of course, becoming Oracle and James Jr. just being a complete and utter psychopath, right? And during this time, he is taken by Scarecrow. And he is used basically for nothing other than bait. He wants to show Bruce that he needs to come and get him. And I absolutely love the fact that we see the shadow work, right? There's one great thing about this book. And not one, there's plenty. But the fact that we see this beautiful artwork just makes it absolutely so creepy, but we're introduced to a character. And just, for her mama, she's a little girl, of course she does. And because we see a little bit of her in him, we see a flashback. And we get Jonathan Crane's backstory, right? We get to see him as a child and his father abusing him. we get to see him actually going through the same thing. Hence the name, Cycle of Violence. His father was a psychologist, wanted to basically not only study fear, but actually be able to control it. And his test subject was his son. And as his son, he went through it again and again and again. Well, we see this same little girl look up at him and ask him why he is bleeding. And she says, why? Why? It doesn't matter. She just asks if he's okay. And that actually irritates him. More than anything, it makes him mad because she's showing sympathy towards him, right? And in doing so, he actually starts to get a little bit of a connection. Well, we see Batman come in, and as Batman comes in, he's got a little trap set. So Scarecrow can jump through, and Batman can fall in this well, and he can take over Batman. That was the initial trap with James Gordon, right? With Commissioner Gordon. So we've got Batman trapped, but of course he has his cowl on because Batman's already figured out how to make sure that cowl is booby trapped. And we get quite a bit of conversation. The original, not that it's anything new, but of course we get Bruce's backstory with everything that happened with his parents. They're going through fear and all of those emotions. That is something pretty typical. And again, we get to see Jonathan Crane growing up, being tortured by his father, going to college and being alone, going to college and doing some weird experiment on a woman, just throwing spiders at her. Yeah. Good advice for life is don't throw spiders on somebody. They're probably not going to like you. Becoming a doctor and then a murderer. And eventually getting back at his father. And this whole time Bruce has been missing. Of course, they are looking for him. But during this time, we see, again, this little girl ask him about his stutter. And she says, it's okay, I stutter too. And then she says she wants to go home. She misses her family. And she says, if I leave, you won't be alone. And she draws a picture of them together. And you actually see the beginning of Scarecrow starting to break down and realize what he's doing. And realize that he is perpetrating that same fear that his father put within him. Well, he still needs his extreme fear toxin, so he's working with Bruce, and he goes through and basically is torturing Bruce, right? And we get a lot of really great fight scenes within this, but one thing that I absolutely love is how he uses Bruce. He tells him, you're going through this. It's not just fear. It's not only fear. You're alone. You're absolutely alone. You had the same upbringing as this person, and look at them. They've got 9 kids. 4 of them are adopted. They do charity. They do, they work at soup kitchens. They've given money up for this organization or that organization, and you're alone. And he's saying basically that Bruce is using Batman as his shield to really not have to answer for anything that he feels. And then we see the police show up, right? He's got his super toxin. He's heading out. And right before he does, Bruce puts a grapnel right through the bottom of his chin. So for the entirety of the rest of this book, he's actually got his chin disconnected and just bleeding all over. It's beautiful and amazing all at the same time. So because the police are there's going to be a bomb that goes off, right? And the little girl is still there. And he takes the time. He goes and grabs the little girl and he says, come on now. And he actually saves the little girl's life. Scarecrow saves the little girl's life. And she's really upset because she doesn't want to see him hurt. And that's exactly what happens, is he definitely gets hurt. So Bruce is returned home. And right now we are seeing just some of the most amazing. It's actually, of course it's a horror, right? But it is so much more than that. It is so dynamically visual and beautiful and messed up and good all at the same time. So we see the grand plan, and he is letting this super fear toxin, of course, all over Gotham. And Bruce is first to run in, but he did just get in a fight with Scarecrow, and he was hung up for a few days. He's lost a lot of blood. and they don't want him to go. Alfred and Damian, of course. Well, he goes anyway because it's Batman, and he, gets into it with a couple people if they don't figure this out quick, basically, and get an antidote to everyone. Nobody is going to survive. They're just going to tear each other apart. And then they realize that Batman is actually already inoculated and they can use his blood. That was my main thing with this. I was like, this isn't quite how this works, guys. Basically, what we see is him hooked up to his plane, the Batwing, and he spews his inoculation that's confounded from his blood literally being taken out and everywhere because comics. Okay. All right. But it works. And he actually, he almost dies. He passes out. And I love that he makes Damian promise to actually finish what he says. And he does. And he ends up living. And then we see him kind of realize where life is and what matters. And because he was with Natalia before, she was a trained pianist. And she was looking forward to this recital. He actually is able to show up and kind of do the little things that he wouldn't necessarily do before. But we do see that in this. We see Scarecrow taken to Arkham, of course, because he was captured. And he has a backup plan. And his backup plan is simply within the stitching of his linens. And it's a fear toxin that he can release when the guards get close. Well, unfortunately for him, or maybe it's poetic justice, when they throw him in the actual cell, those burst open and he is again alone with his demons. And that's a lot of what this was about, right? He kept talking to Bruce, basically projecting him feeling alone and putting it on Bruce. So now he actually is alone with all of those demons, whereas Bruce is able to go out with Natalia and also with Damian and able to enjoy the life that Scarecrow said he'd never have. A lot of the themes within this were something simple, the little things in life, not being alone, not feeling alone. And I thought that's what really makes this stand out from any other Scarecrow story. Because Scarecrow a lot of times is used as a plot device to either, if you're talking about Arkham Knight, to get everybody out of Gotham or to make everybody go crazier. This time we actually heard a story of the person behind the mask. We actually heard a story about Jonathan Crane. We heard a story about, what he is, how he grew up, his weakness, his kryptonite, so to speak. Is that being alone, but actually having some companionship, and he found it in the little girl, even though he did actually return her to her mother. So unharmed, and well, maybe a little trauma in there, but for the most part, she got off quite a bit easier than some of his other subjects. So it's a sweet story. It's a great story. And it's perfect for Halloween. Make sure you guys check it out. And of course, let me know what you guys think. I will see you in the next one. And the cat is crazy. I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.